Right, ladies and gentlemen, this was my tier list coming into the split, and this was, of course, with Upset being updated. Let's reshuffle this a little bit. We have had a very eventful week one, and I think it's important that we are measured in our approach, that we don't overreact, and we look at the gameplay. When I make such a tier list, it's about my expectations coming into week two in terms of performance. This is not who's going to win the league or so forth. This is just based on what we saw in week 3 and the information we carried over from the previous split and how we expect them to perform coming into this one. First and foremost, I would put G2 first. G2 as a roster have built enough credit to actually deserve the first spot. The Vitality versus G2 matchup is going to be very exciting and super interesting. But I think it's important to highlight the fact that Vitality, I can talk about Vitality when I get to Vitality. G2, still, I think this is a team that is super precise when they're ahead. I think that they are very flexible in draft, which is sometimes their biggest weakness too, because I think they make it sometimes a little bit too complicated. They've gotten away with it because they are much better. It's like even in the final against Mad Lions, I think some of those drafts were not so great on paper. I think that they overcooked their drafts and then they've found ways to win just because they're better. And the main thing for me here is that G2 still, when they have advantages, when they have pressure in terms of how they transfer it with jungle and support, how precise they are in terms of macro, how committed they are to each individual decision that each player makes is a thing of beauty. And I think this is where they are much better than everybody else. And this is something that the other teams need to prove that they've caught up on. But I think that in the example of, G2 played against Astralis and they lost that game. I think that was one game where you could see, the team fighting wasn't that great because they just didn't play around the Kate as they should. And they were it's like splitting up the fights, which is very favorable for bruisers because the less burst you have, they are going to, of course, lifesteal more. They're going to have more rotations of spells and they're going to survive. And those numbers, those vamp numbers are just more efficient. So in that game against Astralis, I think they got challenged, but at the same time, I think that the draft was rather poor. But currently, I would say that G2 is the best team in the league. Second, I would put myself between these. I think the main thing for Vitality is just that having stability in the bot side and even a strength in bot side is just such a big level up. It's such a big level up, and I think that Vitality, if you think about what can potentially get them an edge, Vitality against G2, where can they get an edge? I think in the 2v2 top side. If there is a weakness you want to point to for G2, I think it's the 2v2 top side, because Mickey is too far to be to impact the top lane unless he has a big tempo swing. And the main difference, right? If we think about the G2 versus Mad Lions series, they managed to create big advantages through top. But eventually, what occurred was that there was just this competition about who was inting the most. You guys remember back to this third Mad Lions game, right? Where Jace was monster ahead and they managed to create advantages top. The main difference here is that I think Vitality will have the freedom to actually make more educated decisions and not make decisions based off of having players that are on paper much weaker in a position. We're no longer going to see those Vitality games where they're going to lock in Nidalee because they think that there's no hope and jungle needs to carry. They're not going to pick Karthus in a very random manner and force time Yon on stage. That's not going to happen. And I think this is what is going to level up Vitality the most. It's like the benefit of having a very insanely talented bot laner is going to have a ripple effect on everybody else too. They will be allowed to play more precise and they won't have to overperform in order for Vitality to win. And I think this is going to really, usher in this era of very good competition for the likes of G2. But keep in mind, Vitality had a game against a poor Mad Lions draft. They had a game against, of course, Fnatic. And then finally, what was the last game that they had? I'm trying to remember. Excel. And in those games, they weren't challenged on any front. And they played super well through lane phase. And they converted the games into very easy victories. But they had massive leads that definitely made it easier. Now to continue, I would put SK third. SK was a very genuine surprise coming into the first week. Very, very genuinely like good surprise. My main concern here, right, and if I'm comparing these two, right, is that I think SK are quite inconsistent sometimes in the early game, and I think that's where they need to find more precision. But I think the key thing is that Certus and, of course, Irrelevant are playing better and better. And they've always played this role of picking 4-5 and really completing the composition, which I think is another way of highlighting in SK's strength, that they have very good meta reads. Like they were first to play Sion, first to play Elise, things that everyone adapted to, but they were very, very ahead of the curve with that. I think that Markoon is also a jungler that can compete with everyone. I think that this team is looking more and more complete. And I think, especially against Astralis, the key thing for me was that they managed to create a circumstance where they're competing against Astralis 3v3 mid. That was like a big question mark. Like SK, with the games that they won, once again, I don't look at the result only. With the games that they won, they actually answered some very important questions, or at least began to answer, right? Because one game is still a small sample size. SK is looking like a very complete team. And I think the fact that they were contesting 2v2 mid, 3v3 mid, DOS was connecting, I think they were super, super good. I think SK is looking good. I think they have a strong ceiling. I don't see them having enough power individually to be able to beat Vitality and G2. I think their prep work is a massive edge, but I can see a world where Mad Lions still beats them, right? So everyone's now thinking, yo, Mad Lions, why are they A? Now, once again, a lot of the things, how we view a team, a lot of the previous split needs to carry over. I think the easier way for me to explain Astralis and BDS, I think I can explain the placing of Mad Lions by explaining my thought process regarding Astralis and BDS. So, Astralis, I think that they have a very strong bot side, very, very strong bot side. I think that they find ways to dominate bot always. I think Leader in 113 have a very specific play style that makes them very unique in the league, and I think that's a very big advantage. I think it's important when you are on paper weaker than others to find ways to be unique, and I think that Astralis have figured this out. I think that the main concern for Astralis is that what will happen when people begin to figure out these draft patterns, right? It's like they rely on very specific champions in some specific moments. And I think that if people begin to recognize that pattern, I think that teams can begin to pick the right champions into Astralis. Pick the G2 game is such a good example. Enemy team was showing Sejuani, Xayah, and Leona. In that case, you put yourself in a very weak bot lane matchup to make this game very, very focused around 3v3 mid. And if you recognize that pattern and you begin to draft in that direction to match, and you pick Olaf on 3 and then you open up your 4-5 bands, I think that this is where Astralis could be challenged, right? And I think the main thing here, why I have Mad Lions so high is still, I think that in terms of how they impacted 3v3 around mid lane, how good Elioya is, how good also Hilly is in terms of connecting and just taking over games. I think this is an element that carries over for such a long time and will let you win games. I think the main concern for Mad Lions still, in my eyes, is just the performance of Kazi. That is like the main thing. And I still want to put Mad Lions fourth. It's like the main thing for me, right? If the teams go into best of one and they don't see draft, on this weekend I would probably predict Mad Lions to be the stronger team over BDS and Astralis. Next in line, I would just put Koi. Koi is quite a fall from grace, right? I rated them much higher. Koi is kind of repeating a similar start to what we saw in the previous split. I think this team lives and dies by the performance of their bot lane. I think Comp and Trimby have shown enough as players to be able to compete. And I think that the main issue is a lot of jungle changes are directly nerfing what Malrang likes to do. And another layer of it is that everyone started playing that way because of the change of the jungle, so everyone's in tune with it, right? What Malrang does is no longer unique, and he needs to find a way to reinvent himself. I think another layer of it, I think Larsen is not really having a clear identity in terms of what he should play. I think if Larsen finds like the 3 champions, he can just lock in every game and always be useful, and the bot lane figures out ways to, you know, piece the comp together in 4-5. This is where I think Koi was at their best. Finally, I think all in all, as crazy as it might seem, I think my expectations, like I evaluate Team Heretics lower than Fnatic right now. I think the only advantage XL has over the other teams, I would say, is just that XL, you know, I think the XL had a pretty good understanding of what champions are like good on the patch, and they walked in with that. I think in terms of Fnatic, yeah, they had some, you know, fine things in terms of bot lane. Team Heretics, they don't have any crutches to fall back on, and you know, coming into this weekend, we're gonna have the bangers of bangers. Let's do a little bit of a prediction, and I can elaborate a little bit more on the teams as we go through the predictions. All right, Astralis vs Mad Lions. We start off with an absolute banger. I think that this one will heavily come down to draft. If we're going, I don't have access to the Excel document the same way Peter Dunn does, so I'm going to assume that left side is blue side. I think Astralis being blue side definitely allows them to breathe a little bit. Because then they can look to first pick the Seju and the Elise, and they can create circumstances where they play AD mid. But the main thing here is, the more success the leader finds, the more target banned he will become. And the question is, as you peel the layer of the leader onion, how much depth will he find? Or will he drown in his own sauce? Maybe he'll play Viego, maybe he'll play Zed, maybe he'll play Aurelia, Akali, Silas, you know, he has some juicers in his back pocket. And I think if he finds like good angles for them, he can completely 1v9. But when that is going to be a little bit more restricted, for example, Mad Lions can walk into this game, into this series, just counter picking mid lane no matter what. If that is the case, and they don't pick Malphite with Ignite on 5, then, you know, as you become more and more aware of Astralis and what they want to do within the game, I think that they will become easier to beat. And I say easier, it's a light word, because at the same time I still think knowing what Astralis does doesn't make them a lot worse. I think like that they have still, like their bot lane is still really, really insane. But it's like here from the get-go, like I would lean towards Mad Lions. But after draft, maybe I would change my mind. Team Directors versus XL, I just have to lean towards XL, even though it's like a very tough choice, you know, it's like fucking shoot me, you know. Fnatic versus BDS, I think BDS is favored, we talked about it enough. Vitality versus SK, an absolute banger of a game, honestly. An absolute banger of a game. I think Vitality should be favored with everything that they've shown so far, but SK is a team that can make it interesting enough. I think the main issue here is that SK sometimes have a tendency to play shit early games. And if they do that against Vitality, the thing is, against better teams, it's like, let's say a team performance is a flat surface, right? And your flaws are cracks in that surface. The better the team you face up against, the deeper they will cut into those cracks, you know? And I think that Vitality, just all in all, I think they will dominate from the early game. Next in line, Koi versus G2. G2 obviously favored. We have Sunday, BDS versus Astralis, also an absolute banger. I think once again it will come down to draft. Like if I follow my tier list, okay. If I follow my tier list, then I'm leaning slightly to Astralis. XL versus Mad, I think Mad Lions should be favored. Team Heretics versus Fnatic, I think Fnatic is favored. Like, maybe Jankos can carry. That's the whole thing, right? Maybe Jankos can carry. Like, Jankos has been so fucking good this whole year, and it's so sad. But I'm so fucking happy that everyone sees it. I'm so happy that everyone sees it, because Jankos is a damn legend that he's still playing so fucking good. I was listening to Jankos in the mic check, and my man was listening, like, it sounded like he was talking through fucking piles of snow. Like Ankos has been playing so good. But yeah, I think Fnatic. That's my guess. I think Fnatic is gonna take this one. We'll carry on Fnatic. The thing is, it's like it will come down to a little draft gap. I don't think like Ruby and Ebby are going to like put the knife to the throat of Oscarinin and Humanoid. And you guys are sleeping on Humanoid. I played a shit Azure game, but I think still Humanoid can be good. SK versus Koi, Schrot Commando, SK Gaming. And then the biggest game of the weekend, match of the week, G2 versus Vitality. I already talked about this enough, I believe. I think G2 should be slight favorites coming into this. There's a big difference between a G2 that knows they're playing against someone that is good and a G2 that just came off of winning a split and is taking it a little bit easier. And of course, you know, the key thing for me here is that both of these teams didn't have that tough schedules, but we're just looking at nameplates here and we just know it is an absolute banger. I think it's going to be a close matchup, but I favor G2 ever so slightly. Monday, we have EXO versus SK. I think SK is favored. Mad Lions should be favored against Team Heretics. Vitalis should be favored against Astralis. BDS versus G2. G2 should be favored. And Fnatic versus Koi. I would favor Koi. And I think we've covered it all. Things can change. This is just a little fun, little exercise to do to keep get the juices flowing. All of you, I let you guys know that, of course, we're going to be watching the LEC this weekend on my stream as per usual. Please join in and catch me on the stream, yeah?